Monica. God, I haven't interviewed someone in a long time because I just haven't been interested in anything like that. And now here's you. And this is the perfect person. We've been on this tour de force.
It has been 3.5 years. We met really early in the pandemic.
See, we can thank the pandemic for this friendship.
Yeah, I'm so grateful in that way. But our first one was about trying to bring down that fear that the media and public health was whipping up around not using data-based approaches and science-based approaches and kind of who's most at risk, who can feel better about it. And now we're here again.
And here we are. And the thing is, so part of the thing is, look, and you don't even want to promote this. I had to go down to your car and pop your trunk to get the actual book out. You're not self-promoting enough. This is Endemic, a post-pandemic playbook, which you put out. And what is this book about? Because people are so tired of COVID. I'm sure it's selling like zero.
Yeah, it's not selling, which is really fine with me. And you want to work yourself out of a job, right? Like you want to reassure people that biomedical advances and also natural immunity got us to this place and that we are in an endemic phase. Yeah. And it's very fine that people aren't buying it, but it is about a more compassionate approach to public health that takes all of public health into account, not just the effects of one virus. And because I was trained in infectious disease, I know virology, I know immunology, but I also really importantly know the history of infections because I read about them. And we never could have eradicated COVID. And so we had to have known from early on where we needed to get to, which was especially for older people, vaccines, because they needed to get away from the ability to contract severe disease. And that's what immunity does. And so the vaccines were so important. And then for everyone else, actually a lot of people, of course, even if they're older, got natural immunity on top of it because about 95% of people on this planet have seen the virus. There's estimates from a modeling organization in Seattle, IHME. And so at this point, so many people have seen the virus. They have natural immunity. Many people have gotten the vaccine. They have the vaccine. Older people can get the vaccine again and should. We're going to have boosters that are directed against older people. But we are in an endemic phase. And we didn't think 3.5 years ago we'd be at this point. And we have to bring down that fear and be compassionate and celebrate these biomedical advances that got us here.
Yeah, because now we're in a spot where this thing is with us. We kind of said it was going to be, years ago when you and I talked too. Maybe a year ago we did a show like From Pandemic to Endemic. Yeah. And in Europe, in Japan, and other places, they've been treating it like it's endemic.
Since spring of 2022, which I think is really important to point out that everywhere else, because I've been in India several times since then too, everywhere else has treated it as it's endemic since spring of 2022. Why? Because we had Omicron come out on 11/26/21. The reason we all remember that date, it was Thanksgiving Day here in the United States, and it was first identified in South Africa. And BA1 was the first subvariant, and then we had BA2 and BA4 and BA5 and BF27 and XBB and EG5 now and BA2 0.86. That's where we're on now. But we had many variants, and all of those variants led to waves and waves of natural immunity on top of vaccines, on top of the fact that it was a less virulent variant. And by April of 2022, the data showed even from the US, there was no difference in those who were vaccinated or not in hospitalization rate because we had had so many waves of infection. BA1, it was really important to be vaccinated. Delta, really important to be vaccinated. When you and I talked about how important vaccines were, it was in the face of having little immunity. And now there were so many waves of immunity because of this very transmissible subvariants that by 2022, Europe declared it pandemic. It was exactly April 27th, 2022, that the European CDC equivalent said, we have to treat this like an endemic respiratory virus. And how did they do that? Because suddenly respiratory illnesses were no longer elevated. Deaths from respiratory illnesses were no longer elevated above 2019 levels at that point. Mm-hmm. And that was true in the United States too, but we're so polarized. We kept on arguing. We kept on being really mad at each other. Every other one side said it was endemic earlier. The other side said, no, it's not going to be endemic till later. And we declared the end of the global public health emergency in this country on May 11th, 2023, right after the WHO had declared it on May 5th. The only reason the WHO delayed it was because of China, because China had said such a lockdown approach that when their public, when they had mass protests to say you can't do this to us because there's other things in life we can't, sometimes people couldn't get their food and other medical care. They had mass protests. China opened up abruptly on December 7th, 2022, and they had one more wave, unfortunately, of mortality. And then WHO waited till China, and then they declared the end of the public health emergency. But it was everywhere else had declared it except for the U.S., and the U.S. waited till the WHO declared it.
I see. That makes sense. So, but what do you think the Chinese, what do you think of that approach? I'm just curious, because here we were, there was a mix of all this fear, of the messaging around fear, the messaging that, get your vaccine, but nothing will change. You still have to wear masks. You still can't have large gatherings. You're still going to, shut. And
that didn't make sense to me.
Didn't make any sense.
We had the vaccines.
So but the Chinese just said, no, zero COVID policy for all this time until their own people were like, now we're seeing all the ancillary damage.
Yes.
And then it was like rip the Band-Aid off, and this huge, probably massively underreported spike that was going to happen eventually.
It was. And that was so sad, because then in a way they should have opened up more gradually, but they were against a wall because their people were protesting. It was inhumane. I think it was extremely against human rights. Their severe lockdown approach was against human rights, because people couldn't decide for themselves if they wanted to accept the risk of a respiratory virus to go seek medical care for other illnesses. It became completely out of people's own hands, their own decision making. And it was really unkind. It was really a human rights violation.
What do you think happened with the immunity situation in China? Were they not having the level of immunity that we had, say, in the West, because they weren't vaccinating and they had not seen the virus? Like, what's your take?
Yes, I think, unfortunately, vaccines weren't enough, because they had been vaccinated to a certain degree, but we couldn't also get the exact numbers. The UK were saying it was lower than what you're reporting. But they also hadn't boosted their elderly as high enough, because they have a whole virus vaccine, which I'm really into, like Covaxin. But I think the whole virus vaccine is not as immunogenic, and it needed 3 doses, especially for older people. So they didn't have the rates of boosting in the elderly that they needed to open up so abruptly. And they didn't have natural immunity. There was just a really nice piece in the conversation saying COVID is endemic just last week. But what they described is that, unfortunately, you need to see both. I mean, it was natural infection and the vaccines, especially among older people, that got us to this phase of endemicity, because you really saw the whole virus from natural infection, but you wanted to have had vaccine-induced immunity before then, so you couldn't get severe disease. I'm a big proponent of the vaccines. That's why I find it surprising that there would be anything controversial about celebrating vaccines. Like, you and I are both proponents. We talked about how 96% of doctors got vaccinated, but I'm not a big proponent of not figuring out who's now still at risk and boosting those who are still at risk. Boosting everyone doesn't make sense.
Doesn't make any sense.
And no other country is doing this. No other country. I mean, this is a key part of this. No other country but the U.S. did what we did. They didn't do the prolonged school closures in blue states. They didn't have this degree of polarization. They didn't only report fear-based messaging. They reported really optimistic things. When the vaccines came out, they worked. They talked about T and B cell immunity. They were just so positive. And then when they declared it endemic, they didn't look back. They never put back mask mandates. They never put back isolation and quarantine requirements. We are so polarized here.
Yeah. And so much of it has to do with who was president during the pandemic.
Yes.
We had a polarized society in general. And so there was a reaction on both sides. Well, if Trump does this, then we're going to do this. And
the absolute opposite.
Absolute opposite.
Whatever he does, even if he says the sky is blue, then we're going to say the sky is pink.
Exactly.
Because everyone was so, the left, in general, public health officials and ID doctors like me are left, but they but they fought against everything he did, even when he said reasonable things like schools should be open.
Right.
And so if we had had anyone else, I think we would have had a reasonable public health response like they did in Scandinavia.
Right. And that's not saying Trump had direct policies that caused trouble. It's saying because Trump was such a polarizing figure, the left reacted in this way, the right reacted in this way, and now we're still talking about vaccines as it's like some kind of controversy, and we're doing stupid things that the rest of the world isn't doing. Why are we so stupid and the rest of the world is seemingly reasonable? You could talk about the Chinese as being an outlier because they did something just that was, again, political, and they're an autocracy and they can do whatever they want in that way.
Yes, they can. Yeah.
And it did, in the end, did it work? Did it not work? Well, their economy is damaged. They have probably 1 million dead in a very short period of time that's been underreported because they saved it all for the end. So you could actually say this, like lockdowns, that like severe kind of draconian contact tracing and that kind of thing, they can work to lower infection rate, right? But is it a good idea as a policy? And we would say no.
I mean, not in a holistic, if you look at a round, holistic way, that there are other aspects of public health. And the collateral damage has been profound. I'm really interested in the mental health effects in the population in China, and also school effects in children, and people's just how they're doing, but that's not being really reported.
And you'll never get that information. But I'll say this, you'll get it in the U.S. So, you'll get it at least anecdotally.
Here,
So I was just in Alaska on the central Kenai Peninsula. It's a small rural area, and it has a large health system there. And I was talking to people there, and part of the reason I was there is to talk about mental health in healthcare providers and how we can, use different techniques and trying to build this idea of health 3.0, more holistic health system, reducing moral injury in healthcare professionals. And what I would hear routinely is that they had their COVID thing happen. And I know Alaska was actually at the forefront in the early beginning. What they found was the response to COVID, with schools closing and the loss of vulnerable students from their system, was more damaging in many ways. And they were losing staff to actual COVID infections. People were dying. But then what they're seeing now is this huge surge in mental illness in kids who were lost through the school closures. That
is so
never
sad.
came back.
Yeah, and it's being reported everywhere, though.
Everywhere.
That's so sad.
Everywhere.
And who drops out? It's the poor. Who drops out? It's vulnerable populations, Black and brown, racial and ethnic minorities, the very group that you thought kind of the left would want to protect, or they used to.
Right.
And so this led, a patient of mine came into my office 2 days ago, and she said, I'm so angry at Democrats. And I said, why? And she said, because they've become the party of billionaires and coastal elites, and they just neglected this entire poor population. But at least they paid lip service and pretended they cared, but they didn't care. And that is even worse than just not caring and not talking about it. I mean, this is the group that fell out, these vulnerable students. And it's the group that fell out globally. So globally, the poor didn't go back to work, to school. Of course, the rich children went back to school. Of course, the affluent children are back in school now. But in Uganda, the girls went to sex work. So there's a very painful report about how much, if you're an adolescent and you're out of school, then went to sex work, increasing rates of HIV. In boys in Bangladesh, they went to work for their families on the street, and now they're not back to school. So it's Philippines, Brazil also had prolonged school closures, and those are places where children have been lost, but it is children of less means. So they're out, and it's going to be... it's going to affect their whole lives. The education is one of the most important things to be empowered and to have a life. So it's so damaging.
And we were talking about there's the damage of that, but then there's the damage of stigmatizing people to turn them into kind of untouchables. So like these kids are taught that they're vectors of disease. They could kill their parents or their grandparents.
Yeah.
So we're already telling kids you're dirty or avoid dirty people. And then we create a whole new class of untouchables, like
unvaccinated.
We're
the untouchables.
Yeah. Oh, sure, you've had COVID 12 times already, but you're not vaccinated.
That tennis player.
Right.
Like he was an untouchable, but he did really well.
Yeah.
I believe. He was
touched
very
the
good.
ball pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it all again comes to this idea estimation, it's all about identity. So in the US, we polarized into these sub-identities. Like, I'm a Democrat who believes this. I'm a Republican who believes this. I'm a libertarian who believes this. And so then we were out there fighting against perceived enemies who are evil because we don't actually talk to them because we're closed down and we're interacting through these social media mechanisms where we're often anonymous. That's why I hate Twitter or X or whatever Elon's calling it, because you can be Anonymous McGee and say anything you want. When you say something as yourself, well, now you're responsible because that person can show up on the street and ask you, hey, why did you say that about me? Like, here I am. Tell me to my face.
These attacks from anonymous thing, it's terrible. It's terrible. I have a big goal of getting off Twitter. But you're right. Actually, this is a really interesting thing you say, because I used to be in the club. So I used to be, like, have my Democrat policies. And then I was kind of a dissenter during COVID, in the sense that my real interest is in poverty. My real interest is in disparities between rich and poor. And this response deepened the disparities between rich and poor. It was deeply unfair to the poor of shutting down schools where people could go to private school if they had means, of shutting down businesses where people who had money could stay home and do their computers and laptop work. And it also thrust 100 million children each year of 2020 and 2021 into poverty worldwide. So because I'm really interested in poverty, that's just my main interest. I was out of sorts with the Democrats because they deepened poverty during this COVID response, because they were mad at Trump and all that. But they deepened poverty. It was deeply unfair. And my patients are poor, so I would see all these effects because I treat a publicly insured patient population, and they'd say, are your children in school? And I'd say, yes, I'm in private school and they're in school. And they'd say, really? I cannot, those public schools will not open. Can you fight for us? Can you fight for us? And so they didn't have any way to send their children to school. And there were 8-year-olds. One person in my clinic who works with me, her 8-year-old would be home alone so she could come and work as a staff member in our clinic. And the 8-year-old would be home alone on
devices.
On devices. It was so sad. And then when I was in India, there would be a son and a daughter in a family, and they'd have one device in a family of the driver, and so someone who was low means, and the device would go to the boy, and then the girl would be out of luck. So one device in the family. So only boys got online school.
So I see.
Yeah,
I see.
So that all that playing out in India too.
So it's vastly increasing the disparities that were already
vastly increased
terrible.
Disparities. And I went into infectious diseases because I was interested in disparities between rich and poor. So but my point is I became a dissenter. I really didn't think this response was right, especially around school closures.
Let's use the term that the left will use. You're a heathen. You committed heresy. You should be excommunicated from the tribe. You're self-promoting. You're wrong about everything.
Yeah, that's what they say. Yes, those leftists. Yeah. And what happened then is, because I'm super left, but then I violated the left in that way, they were attacking me, like you said. And I realized for the first time that you can have a variety of opinions. They don't have to be in one tribe.
Heaven forbid.
In fact, you can just have a principle that you believe in. So I have like 2 principles I believe in. One principle is I'm really desperately unhappy about global poverty. And about disparities between rich and poor. That principle drove everything I did. I'm also really interested in the concept of human companionship and human togetherness and connection, because not just because all primates need connection, but because I've seen firsthand the stigmatization of people who are gay, who live with HIV, and what social isolation and stigmatization, and telling someone that they're dirty because of their inherent something about them, which is sexuality. They were dirty and they needed to stay away from people. And that's what we told people during the pandemic about breathing, that it was dirty to breathe. And so you had to cover that breath, and you had to stay away from your grandparents, and you had to stay away from human beings. And by telling that, we created fractures and misery and more anxiety and depression. And we're now at our highest suicide rate that we've ever had in the United States. And mental health effects on children are unfathomable. And that isn't the right thing to do. That's not holistic public health. That doesn't think about despair and other aspects of public health.
So what I'm hearing, Monica, is we should have just locked down longer and harder. That's what I'm hearing.
Right.
Is that what this book? That's what the book says.
Yeah,
the last chapter.
Yeah, the last
Okay,
chapter
here's the prescription
says,
for the
in
future.
fact, China should never have opened.
Well, you listen, everything you said is like what you and I has been the theme of our conversations from during the pandemic, after the pandemic. And this is kind of like a nice way to bring it all together because we don't want this to be repeated in the future.
No, that's really important.
That's the thing. And you say in the book how not to do that.
That's the last chapter. The chapter 5 is on school closures, which was so painful to chronicle all the effects of school closures, especially in the global setting, that I can't actually look at chapter 5. But I would encourage people if the two people who buy
I'm putting
it, like
my reading
mom and
glasses
you.
on. That's how serious I am.
It's really painful.
Yeah.
So it's very painful because the documentation, you can't get away from how wrong that was for children. But then chapter 6 is on the duty of public health. And I think the duty is to tell people how to stay safe. Like we talked a lot about masks at the beginning because I think masks allowed people to
get
have ability not to lock down.
Yeah.
And so how to stay safe, but also they get to make their decisions. If you decide that a funeral for your family member and that human aspect of putting your family member to rest, which I couldn't do with my husband until 2 years in the pandemic, and it meant a lot to put his ashes in the Ganges. But if you decide as a family that process of having a funeral is an important human process, or going to church is important for you in a religious way to go, public health should tell you how to stay safe, but they shouldn't tell you that you can't be human.
Yeah.
And so that's what the 6th chapter is about. And then the 7 is a 10-point playbook. And it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 points. And it really starts with accelerate vaccination because I think vaccination is profoundly important, especially global equity, and especially in who's most at risk. Maybe the next pandemic, children are most at risk. First, do child vaccines. Maybe this pandemic, not maybe. This pandemic, older people were most at risk. Get them the vaccine first. Accelerate vaccination, first step. Second is actually ease restrictions as soon as you have the vaccine, meaning why do we have mask mandates after the vaccine? No other country did that. They didn't. They said once you get vaccinated, go back to normal. Life is normal. Biomedical advances set us free. Like they set us free in HIV. We didn't celebrate those biomedical advances. And then actually the third is keeping the outside open. Like remember we closed those beaches and the sand boxes and the
nonsense.
Outside put like tied up the basketball hoop so that rich people had backyards and poor people couldn't go to the playground. So don't ever close the outside. That's the best place to be for a respiratory pathogen. Ventilation is one of the most important things you can do. The fourth step is schools are a special example. Even when children were more at risk for measles, diphtheria, influenza, we did what it could to keep schools open because schools are so important for children. And then the fifth step is avoid lockdowns of medical care and of anything actually that is imposed on people. You can tell people that, hey, I'm like
Stay home
in
if
Japan,
you can.
they said, we're not going to close businesses. They actually were not allowed to, but they said, why don't, if you're in an indoor public space, let's wear masks, let's open the windows, let's do this. Maybe if you're older, let's not do this. But they didn't tell people that they had to do that. It was recommendations. They did that in Sweden as well, and it really worked well. And then the next step is if deep cleaning doesn't work or something ineffective doesn't work, don't do it because it's theater. And
wait, I can't point a temperature gun at your head and know that you have COVID or not?
Anymore, right?
Jesus.
And that just reduced trust in public health.
Yeah.
And then the next to final step is antivirals, because any epidemic that can't go away. And the reason that COVID can't go away is there's like 35 animals that have it. It spreads when even right before you have symptoms. It looks like a lot of other viruses. And fundamentally, the vaccines or natural infection don't cause sterilizing immunity. And it also mutates a lot. So if it can't go away, those are the 5 reasons. Smallpox had none of those. All of those smallpox didn't have. Smallpox had no animal reservoirs.
Right.
If it can't go away, we need antivirals. So therapeutics, Paxlovid is kind of first generation, but we're going to get more.
Yeah.
And then the last circle on that picture is building back trust in public health. And that's where we are now, because 30% of people trust the CDC by a Health Affairs report that was published in March of 2023. It was in Health Affairs, but it was run out of Harvard. 30% of people trust the CDC. This is the time to increase trust in public health. And we have to be doing this so that something terrible doesn't happen and no one listens to you.
I mean, this is common sense 101 from somebody who actually does this for a living.
Seems common
experience
sense.
with. And what's interesting here is I'm looking at the endorsements on this book, and I'm just laughing. You got a CNN correspondent, Sanjay Gupta, to say a thoughtful and reasoned plan to help prepare for the next pandemic. So everything you just said is like the opposite of what CNN has been saying for 3 years.
Because I actually think I was super data-based, and so he actually wrote a longer blurb in there that says, I always turn to Monica Gandhi to look at like the papers because I never said a statement on Twitter that didn't have a paper. There were very few times where I just said, like people would write "wear masks, save lives" or something, and they wouldn't have a paper. I always say something about T-cell immunity, and I link to a paper. It's not my opinion. It was a paper, and then you have to mention the other.
Oh yeah. By the way, when I cite things, I say things like everything is consciousness. God et al.
Well, we're both there.
Yeah. I mean, that's the only citation.
Only. I read God. He knows.
What do you mean he? They.
What they know?
God's pronouns
God, Shiv,
are
Shakti. Both.
Beautiful. They, them, those. That's so. A timely, lucid, and well-referenced book, an essential addition to the COVID literature, says Bob Wachter, MD, Chair of Department of Medicine at UCSF. So, I mean, Bob...
He is my department chair, yes.
Yes. Well,
I mean, I think he and I may have taken a different approach, and everyone kind of brings their personal biases in, right? But one thing about this book is that... like the last chapter is really all references because I really never want to say anything without linking to something.
That's a lot of references.
So if you look at all those references, I'm trying to make it about reason and objectivity and not my own opinion.
You know what's not reason or objectivity? The fact that I think her picture makes you look like the Indian Oprah. Yes.
Okay. But I have never given out a car. But I do like Oprah. She's a nice person, but I am not a good actress and I've never given out a car.
You get a mask, and you get a mask, and you get a mask.
Remember how masky I was? I think that's really important to say to give me credibility with people who yell, is I was so very, very masky. But I did not understand after vaccines why you'd wear a mask. Because then what? Didn't that unlock the key to normal life like it did in Europe and India and Japan and South Korea and everywhere else?
Yeah.
Like, why did we make it a talisman?
Yeah, because again, the same thing, identity, politics, division. I was just in Japan for 2 weeks.
Yes.
Now they are having like a 9th wave, right? No surprise.
Well, always
it's going to be there. Yeah. And you would see it reported in their paper, but it wasn't a headline. It was one of the things. And I look out on the street, everything's open, as it has been. About maybe 10 to 15% of people are wearing masks.
Wow.
And in Asia, that's a cultural thing anyways.
Wow.
You got a cold, you put a mask on. And we went to places like, there's a thing called Team Labs in Tokyo, where it's a bunch of people crammed into a very small space and you experience this immersive art.
Wow.
And there were a lot of Japanese there too. And there was like 0 masks. And people were with other people, like in awe of the art and putting their feet in water together, like it's a water feature, like bare feet, walking around barefoot. It was gorgeous, beautiful,
and
rational.
It's joy. See, so we took away a lot of people's joy, right? We took away all this joy. But right now is the time to bring back joy. And part of being joyful is being around other humans. So my parents, and this is, so my parents were 88 and 82. I encouraged them to live normally after vaccines, which they did because they listened to their daughter. And they have had like parties with their friends and things. And because they're older and my dad has had chemotherapy, they'll get boosters. And then my dad had COVID recently, and we gave him Paxlovid. He didn't like the way it tastes, so I think he stopped it early. But like, there are tools, and he can live normally, and he does live normally.
That's right.
Because he listens to me, because he needed joy, and he needed to see his grandchildren, and he needed joy. And all this stuff is joy, right? And I don't know why public health would take away things that cause joy, because joy then is good for mental health. And then there's like study after study that shows that if you don't have someone in your life, you die earlier because people need human companionship, right? So
it's even worse because they took away joy, but they replaced it with like jabby things. Like they're like, okay, you get a vaccine, but in return, you still get no joy.
You still get
have
no
to
joy.
mask.
Yeah.
You're still going to close these things. It's still going to be a culture of fear. Oh, and the vaccine is not going to keep you really, it's not going to let you do your thing, but you have to get it or you're untouchable.
They decreased trust in vaccines, I think.
Oh, by an order of
way
magnitude.
more.
Look what's going on with kids' vaccines.
Right. Yeah. So now our routine childhood vaccinations have gone down.
Yeah.
Because they essentially said the vaccines don't work.
Yeah.
By saying that you need masks and social distancing after vaccines.
Exactly.
Not recognizing the power of cellular mediated immunity, T cells and B cells, which cover all variants. I'm sorry. Some people who think that variants aren't covered by T cells and B cells, but they are.
Are we still good on severe disease for most people?
Yes, we are, because I work in a hospital and the severe disease, there are people at UCSF who tweet that will say they have not seen severe disease in the hospital. There's one hospitalist who's very good about this since 2022, because even if someone comes in and they have COVID in a test, they don't have COVID pneumonia.
Right.
And a lot of people are saying, please CDC, report severe disease because it's very, very low. And they reported that in Denmark. And by doing that, they could say that we're in the endemic phase in 2022.
This thing is with us and it's not causing this excessive. But here's the thing, and this is what people hardly ever talk about. When you're elderly and fragile or you have multiple chronic diseases, you get a rhinovirus, you get a
common cold
virus. It could throw you into a spiral that can kill you.
Yes.
We don't lock you down. We don't mask you. We don't do all these things to reduce your joy. We say this is part of getting old and this may be the thing that tips, and then we treat it as we can with supportive care. But with COVID, we've done the opposite. We're like, no, this is COVID that killed you.
Exactly. It's really interesting because I keep on thinking to myself when I saw my dad get COVID.
My dad got it too.
Through it,
in a very
he's
fine. 83.
Very frail, but was absolutely fine because he had tools.
Yeah.
I keep on thinking I'd rather him get SARS-CoV-2 where I can give him an antiviral than rhinovirus when he's very, very frail and there's no tools.
There's nothing you can do.
So the other aspect of that book is in HIV, we celebrated tools. We celebrated biomedical advances. When we got antiretrovirals, we said, this is so great. And actually you can't pass it on after antiretrovirals and, no condoms and no need and undetectable equals untransmittable and go and live your life and you're going to have a normal lifespan. And all we did was reassure people. But doctors didn't reassure people during COVID-19 that these vaccines worked really well if you're older and that natural immunity worked well and and T cells and B cells work. They didn't reassure people. They went into the scare tactic. And I don't understand that because it feels like doctors, part of our job is reassurance that biomedical tools work. Otherwise, why would you take that biomedical tool?
Yeah.
And I think we decrease vaccination rates even of COVID, not just routine childhood vaccinations, but people were like, wait, I have still to mask. Why am I going to take this vaccine?
And this is something Paul Offit has said again and again and again, is our messaging on this has been totally backwards to what's actually happening, what's true about the vaccine. It's one thing to say, we should message in a way that encourages the right behavior. No. Let's message in the way that's actually correct.
True.
It's true.
Facts.
It's fact. So, okay, it doesn't prevent infection, but it prevents severe disease.
Which is why we developed a vaccine to begin with.
That's why
because common cold coronaviruses, we haven't developed a vaccine.
Because
we're
reason.
It's a cold.
Right.
So we
have enough collective B and T cell immunity among human populations that we don't die of it.
Yes.
Now, if you go back in time and you give it to a Native American population that's never seen it, they're going to get COVID-like pneumonia. They're going to die.
From a mild cold coronavirus. And that's the thing about immunity. Immunity works. And that's the thing about this conversation piece that I'm going to send to you, if you can post, that it said, unfortunately, immunity is the only way through a pandemic.
Yeah.
And
you've been saying that consistently.
Very consistently. But people who think that masking and avoiding infection and avoiding human beings and being so and telling people that they're awful for breathing and whatever we did, that the only way through a pandemic is immunity. And we believed that in 1918. But somehow we lost a conception of immunity because it was political, I guess, in 2020. And everything became political. Everything was some people were modeling after China's approach, which was very autocratic, like you said. And then some people were modeling after Sweden's approach, like Florida was more Sweden's approach. And at the end, it was all about immunity. It didn't matter. It all came out in the wash, except for the diseases of despair, which were more in populations that shut down. Yeah. And that is really important to say. Suicide, homicide, alcohol-related deaths, car-related deaths, there was more of that. And I actually wrote the chapter for our infectious disease Bible on COVID. And I was really interested. It's called Mandel's. And I was really interested in what the editor wanted me to write about.
You're in Mandel's?
It's Mandel's. Remember
That's
the
hot.
big?
Yeah.
And so this is our ID textbook. Yeah. What did they want us to write? I wrote it with a fellow ID doctor. And I said, give us some instruction. We could write about vaccines. We could write about therapeutics. We could write about the response. They said, a harm reduction approach.
Oh, wow.
We chose you to write this because we want to talk about what caused harm, like school closures. And I said, wait, you want me to put in like all the harms of school closures into the ID textbook? I really wasn't going to. And they said, yes, we do, because we want to make sure this doesn't happen again.
There's hope for the future.
I know. So you should feel good about that. Because that's, I do think in my heart, I really do believe this. I believe all infectious disease doctors thought the same way. But because of political aspects, they may not have said about the school closures because they were worried about being canceled. And maybe I said it more because maybe I had a little bit less to lose because my husband had just died before the pandemic. I don't know what made me just keep on saying it, but I think I have this like idea that we all kind of think the same way. And they may not have said it.
I don't think it's an idea. Every ID doc I've talked to has felt the same way. When I travel and do talks, they're like, listen, thanks for saying what we couldn't say publicly.
Oh, really?
Which is closing schools was an abomination.
Yeah,
and
really bad.
Continuing mask mandates after vaccines have been out there for the broad population makes no sense. And
so they did feel the same way. They couldn't say it.
I can't. I mean, my sample size is whatever it is.
But there was censorship.
But it's what you said in the beginning of this conversation. When you are saying things that violate the dogma of the tribe that you find yourself in,
which I was always in,
which you're always in, and you still in so many aspects are in that tribe. You care about poor people, heaven forbid. And
that's actually been the principle from the beginning. You and I talked about that.
That
my patients suffered so much from the response. They suffered so much,
and that's what Vinay Prasad would say. That's what Jay Bhattacharya would say. These people who've been pariahified by the left, despite like Vinay being. And Marty McCary, same thing.
Yes.
So Marty identifies as like a progressive who cares about disparities and evidence, and then he sees what happens in the pandemic. Now, nobody's right about everything, and yes, we all mispredicted certain things because it's a pandemic.
Yeah.
But the truth is the principles are accurate.
Immunology is accurate. Like if you want to go in principles, like immunology is accurate. Like saying that T and B cell immunity isn't there is very silly.
Madness.
And then the second thing is accurate, I think, is that responses hurt the poor. So I use this anecdote in the book that in the cholera epidemic in 1851, they closed down the city of London, but all the rich people stayed in their house and all the poor people brought them food. Doesn't that sound like Uber Eats? Doesn't that sound like what happened in San Francisco? And so was that kind of eternal downgrading of the poor or people who don't have means has happened before in epidemic responses, but it always hurts the poor more. And we could have done better.
We knew better too. That's the thing.
We've had these lessons. All you had to do is watch Europe.
So in my opinion, and you tell me what you think. I don't know if you put this in your book. I think this is more a scientific manual and hey, here's how you don't make these mistakes. Here's the evidence. Here's my big list of references.
Yeah,
and
so many.
And that's why you have endorsements from people that might actually disagree with some of the things as the pandemic went through because the methods are right. There's a component of human fear that was capitalized on by the general polarization of the public during all of this.
Yes.
So then you have social media, which didn't exist during other pandemics, which create these bubbles of thought and echo chambers that then amplify this kind of feeling. And then you actually have state efforts at disinformation that promote one side or the other too. You know what I saw recently that just made me laugh. So like just talking about vaccines, how we've set vaccines back so far. It's so easy now to hate vaccines. It's so easy to do it because if you disagree politically with, say, the left, it's easy to hate what they've done about vaccines and forcing boosters on college-age kids before they can go get their degree that they paid for.
6-month-olds too.
6-month-olds, you're crazy. Russia TV, RT, Okay, they're a propaganda arm of the Russian government. When Putin had Prigozhin murdered in this little plane accident, the RT put out an article saying, it's highly possible that the pilot who had been vaccinated for COVID had COVID vaccine-induced myocarditis and a heart attack, and that's why the plane crashed.
Oh my! So they're using propaganda like we use propaganda.
And you think they don't have millions of bots on Twitter promoting all kinds of things on both sides of political aisle to create dissent in the U.S. We get played by this in a culture, in a setting of fear, in a pandemic, with this social media hijacking our limbic system and our emotions. I mean, how upset do you get when you look at Twitter? Imagine that now when you're politically motivated and now you're being manipulated by state actors outside of the U.S. So it's a perfect storm.
That's so interesting.
To divide
and painful. Us. Yeah, and it does divide us. But the fact that the world in general, and the Bay Area is a little different because we had such a lockdown approach. But in general, the world has accepted that COVID-19 can't be eradicated, that severe disease is what's to be prevented, and that we have better tools for COVID-19 than we have for many other respiratory viruses, including RSV, which we don't have a good antiviral for. The fact that the world's accepted that and gone back to normal is a ringing endorsement, probably, that people felt the same way that we did throughout the whole pandemic, but they just didn't want to say it. And so that's why I was fascinated that the editors of an ID textbook would say, write what you wrote during the pandemic. Basically write endemic and put it in a chapter. And that's our ID Bible.
That's great.
And I like that because that makes me believe that we were in a political turmoil and so people didn't want to say things, but people do know virology, immunology, and have a holistic view of public health. And mental health effects matter.
So let me throw something your way. And I think that's beautiful, but you're still going to see articles out there where I was just looking at was it The Independent, where they were talking about a Royal College of London study that just came out saying, hey, look, lockdowns actually worked. Or not lockdowns masking aggressive measures worked. And I didn't look at the study itself, but I read the article on it and I was like, well, it sounds like another observational study that has some motivated reasoning, and they don't look at the actual ill effects of whatever those same measures are. And so I'm curious if you saw that or...
Yeah, I saw that, and a similar article was actually written by people at the San Francisco Department of Public Health because they had to justify their actions in San Francisco. And what they refused to say in the byline and in the coverage of it was the collateral damage. And then if you actually look at the paper, they talked about how we saw increases in deaths, unfortunately, in San Francisco of younger people. We saw massive increases of overdose deaths. We saw increases of deaths by diseases of despair. And they actually had the data in the paper. They just didn't put it in the abstract. So it is that there is no doubt, actually, probably, that China at the beginning with the massive lockdown approach had less COVID mortality at the beginning. What you have to decide is you had to put things in an entire holistic way to look at all of the effects on public health, be clear-eyed, be reasonable, and figure out, once you have vaccines especially, that it will hurt people to give them so much fear and not trust the vaccines. It will also hurt people to not go to school. You have to just have kind of not a myopic look at one virus and keeping that virus transmission down when severe disease is why we were so scared of COVID-19. And it was a real pandemic. It was a real virus. It would cause terrible illness. And then we got tools to combat it. And so that's what I don't understand is looking at public health in totality. And that's what this book is about, because we can't really do this again because it will be really bad for children.
You know what? I think you and I both had a...
And we love children.
We do like kids. We like kids.
I'm not going to say
not in a creepy way.
No, but...
No. I always have to clarify. This is the internet.
We have excellent children, and we have this idea that we should let them be friends. We want them to be friends.
That's right. Yeah. Monica's already decided on the arranged marriage between our children.
Well, because arranged marriages work better.
Listen.
Better, always. India has lower divorce rate. So I do kind of want to put my children with
I like how you're thinking only, but we'll have to put them, but then also just tell them, there's no choice.
Yeah,
This is how it is.
Don't let them have choice.
No.
Like we did in
That's
pandemic,
right.
no
Pandemic,
choice.
Too much choice.
Yeah.
Okay? Fatafat. Just do what I'm saying. Oh my God. I actually can't wait for the kids will really, because they'll both be like, is your mom crazy? Yeah. Is your dad crazy? Yeah. Oh, they're both crazy. All they do is just rant and rave about how we shouldn't have closed schools. And I kind of liked schools closed because I could sit home and play video games. Yeah, me too.
I am, but like you, I am also calming down about the school things because by writing, you get to put it all in writing.
Yeah.
And then this becomes, whether anyone reads it now or not, maybe they'll read it they'll read it in the future.
Yeah, for the next
Chapter 5 becomes a treatise, putting all in one place how bad school closures were. And that's why I think we won't do it again.
That must have been cathartic for you. You know what I think? I think people should buy this book, Endemic, a post-pandemic playbook. I'm saying it out loud because we have a podcast too with no video. If only to have a kind of catharsis for what they intuitively felt was their experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they thought maybe they were crazy because
it is I really do think it's the reasonable book. Because one thing that I didn't ever say on this podcast, but San Francisco is really locked down, but I would go around San Francisco and people would come up to me and say, oh, you're that person. You're the reasonable person. I totally agree.
Yeah.
And so it was really helpful to get that idea that you were speaking to actually people through this.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they couldn't say it.
Yeah, they can't say it. And that was the experience I had as well. And you know, what's interesting is that people aren't going to come up to us on the street and say, I think you're totally wrong and you're costing lives and we should have locked down and masked and double, triple, quintuple vaccinated as a 3-month-old, even though they have no functional ability to respond to this vaccine. We're probably not going to hear that. So, but I do think, you know, now that we're looking back, in the end, everything seems to come back to what you were pointing at, which is connection with humans and the rather non-conceptual aspects of being a human, which is, A, we're here to live a life. We're not here to inflict our will on others, to control others, to live in fear, to not to suck the joy out of others' lives and suck the joy out of our own so that the life can be a couple clicks longer, maybe, on
that's dubious.
Questionable evidence. We're here, and the problem is that, again, it's in the setting of the fear, the polarization, the social media, and the stuff that maybe will lead to either collapse of civilization in this way that we know it and something new will happen, or this is a stage in the unfolding of this that we'll start to wake up and see. And I think pandemic may wake people up. Reading this book may say, you know what? We were total idiots about this.
That's really interesting that you say that, because I think that when people went back to joy, like, because there are a lot of people who did start ignoring
they're done with it. Yeah.
The advice, because the advice did not seem reasonable when they would go and see that every other country after vaccines stopped masks. When they went back to joy and joyful events, they really enjoyed them and their lives became richer and fuller. And so I think that it's a lived experience that they saw that the fear that the media and public health produced was not an approach that was actually compassionate. And I think we have to go back to also this word compassion, because it is easy to prey on people's fears because life is hard. But why would you prey on people's fears when you have tools to, like, I called the mask a tool to unlock people's fears before. And it's so much better to have a vaccine so that you have T and B cell immunity. And why wouldn't you want people to be happy? I don't know. So I think public health has to go back to the idea of making people's lives, of understanding that life is not just about avoidance of risk, but life is about fullness.
Joy.
And I hope public health will become much more optimistic after this event, because they were pessimistic because they were being political.
Yeah. And again, I think the other thing is some forgiveness. There's so many people holding grudges on both sides of this thing.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of anger because there was a lot of strong emotion, vitriol, attacking, life and death situations apparently on the line. And people hold it. There's a distinction, and I think you all innately understand this because you said compassion, working in HIV, between empathy, where you like, I look at Monica and I go, oh, you know, she's South Asian like me. She's a doctor like me. She's a parent like me, and she's suffering in some way. And I can totally relate, and I can take that suffering and feel it here. And I go, oh God, we got to do something about that because it's uncomfortable. I feel it. That's empathy. It's narrow. You kind of have to look and feel like me. And you kind of have to be in tribe for it to really work. And you have to be one person. It's very hard to empathize with a group of people or the poor, for example. You can empathize with a little girl, and charities have known this forever. But compassion is different. Compassion is understanding there is no difference between you and I. We're the same stuff. Mm-hmm. And so I don't have to feel your pain as my own to know that you're suffering, and to be the space that radically and unconditionally loves in the face of that suffering. And that's what you do in HIV. You're not a gay man that I know of. No. You may identify as such, no. But you're not. Yeah. But you can have this radical compassion for those who are suffering, who are publicly insured, who don't have means, and open into that. And that's the same compassion that I've seen you show for all sides of this, even when you take a stance during COVID. And that's what separates you, I think, from people who have been much more vitriolic on all sides of it. And I think we need more of the Monica Gandhi, the Gandhi approach, and maybe a little more moderation of the other types of you know, in-group, out-group fighting.
I really like what you just said, because I think people who attacked me or other people who thought schools should be opened, I didn't attack back because they must have been coming from a place that I can't truly understand, but because I know that eventually the school closures had been pretty much proven, even the New York Times and CNN, and you know, there's a pretty widespread consensus that it wasn't good for children. Yeah. So we have come to that consensus in 2023, which is good. But there must have been reasons that people had, and I can't guess at those reasons. And but I do have a general compassion for fear, because I lived through a lot of fear when my husband had a bad scan and was going through cancer, and fear is makes it so that you can't think, and sometimes you want to lash out and make it on someone else, even though the cancer wasn't anyone's fault. And a new virus makes people really scared. So we just have to be compassionate. If we could be compassionate, moderate, reasonable, kind. Understand virology and immunology, and understand that we can never get rid of this respiratory virus, but we have really good tools. Let's move on from this, because I want people to move on from COVID. And the reason I want people to move on from COVID is we have other problems, and those problems are really real. And our polarization and how we act in the U.S. prevents us from moving forward in positive ways to solve problems. And what I saw in India, and India is 1.4 billion people, more than China, that Delta was terrible. They didn't have vaccines. They got 8 vaccines. They gave everyone choice. Like, they gave people choice of like whole virus vaccines and mRNA and DNA. They just gave the population a choice. You can go to a pharmacy and see 8 different vaccines, Sputnik 5, a Russian vaccine. And everyone got vaccinated, or most of them did. And then they just moved on. And now they're focusing on their other problems.
Focusing on landing a rover.
They did land on the moon, and we should
the moon.
Proud.
Oh, totally. Yeah. The whole time I was thinking
we did it.
Totally. Apollo Walla 13.6.
Apollo Walla.
Right?
Because we did it. I mean, doesn't have the resources of the U.S. Okay, please give me a break. Like, dude, that is a lower resource country. We did it.
They did it for like Daisy Price too. They were like, we did it for like a couple million. Like, totally. Like, America spends billions and billions and billions, and all the scientists are getting paid. And then those guys are like, you know what? Get that guy over there. He looks like he knows math. That guy makes pretty good metal. Put that thing there, and then, okay, 3, 2, 1, go. Hey, it was perfect.
Well, Raju, you did a
joking.
good job.
Yeah, he's like, yeah.
But no, I was very happy.
It was so nice.
I was very impressed.
My parents were sending it to me. They're like, look at this, man.
Yeah, we should be proud.
Because so many years, so many decades, Indians have felt self-stigmatized by the struggles of their country.
And the subaltern view that colonialists made them feel like they were inferior and they were less than. And my children oft quote the statistic that Britain took $45 trillion from India.
Wow.
And that Kohinoor diamond that's sitting in England. And they should give it back. But,
give it back.
Yeah. So yeah, that was despite all odds. And that was a lot of struggle. And so that's what I mean. There's like a really complex life out there. And this is one virus that's joined the other endemic viruses that actually have better tools than the other endemic viruses. Influenza vaccine does not work as well as COVID vaccines. Influenza Tamiflu does not work as well as Paxlovid. Good tools, celebrate them.
Yeah.
And so, because it became political, even right now, there's a variant BA2 8.86, and the media is whipping up fear when the hospitalizations are staying really low. And I know that because I work in a hospital. And so they should also talk to people who work in hospitals. But so that fear whipping, I think they'll stop. I think they'll stop when they get onto the election.
The election,
The election will be the
That'll
spring
distract
variant.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll wag the dog the other direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. You know, I've advocated, and people will disagree with me, just stop watching the news. Stop really engaging in that way, because it is such a funnel of despair, because they're incentivized to give you negative.
Because that's clickbait. And I actually said there were 3 reasons why we use such a fear-based approach. One was the Trump reason.
Yeah.
So whatever Trump says, we have to do the opposite.
That's in the book?
That's in the book.
That's nice.
The second is they felt that people would comply more with public health measures if they used more fear. But we've seen that in HIV. You don't just tell everyone like you're going to get horrible AIDS and die of horrible chaos all over. We said, hey, use condoms, let's stay safe, but please have your life.
Yeah.
So that was the harm reduction approach. And then the third is clickbait. Like that wasn't an idea before when you had to physically go buy a paper.
Yeah.
And so but only our country did this. There's another statistic in this book that the international media, when the vaccines came out, they celebrated them. They totally reported good news. This is great. And they also reflected more of the medical literature. They were more in line with the medical literature reporting, whereas it was always bad news being reported in the U.S. media. And so that was a very particular function of the U.S. that happened. And that all conspired to make this really difficult response in the U.S. That's still ongoing.
It makes perfect sense. I mean, we would see it in YouTube stuff. Like if I did a video on COVID and the headline had something in it that was like, that would trigger the emotion, it would get a ton of engagement. And so people would game their headlines even. Now they're using AI to design the headlines, because you can ask ChatGPT, hey, how do you like get a fear-based headline that's going to get a lot of anxiety-driven clicking? And it'll be like, here you go. Here's 12 different options. And now I don't know how it's been validated. I don't know if anyone's done any validation work on does it work, but and what are we going to call this episode? I mean, you can brainstorm it now. If I say, fear of the next pandemic, like how to keep yourself alive, something like that.
Well, you would probably get fear-based, but what we could say, I mean, I think it's about restoring trust in public health. If I were a public health person, because I'm an academic ID physician, but I'd feel kind of gross that like 30% of people don't trust the CDC.
Yeah.
So, one thing is something about restoring trust in public health, or infusing joy, or joy as a part of public health, or human connection as a part of health.
So that's what we believe. That's the truth of this episode. Will that?
Oh,
yeah.
The
no one will
clickbait?
click on it.
Oh, say that.
No one will click on
say
it.
Frodo died of COVID. Remember my little dog, and then he passed.
Poor Frodo.
Say Frodo died of COVID, and then people will
your dog
clickbait.
is next.
And
yeah.
your dog is next. Your dog is next.
Because
Bilbo's
you know what? People
next.
care more about their animals than they do about people. And by the way, R.I.P. Frodo, such an adorable little
so
guest
sweet.
on the show.
But
My
I
first
tell you, I have a
guest.
cat who I think is his reincarnation.
You did tell me that.
Yeah.
So why do you?
Because Frodo had smelly eyes, which is a very distinctive feature. Like you don't just go, "Oh, my dog's eyes smell bad," and this cat's eyes smell bad.
Oh wow!
He's Frodo.
Wow.
He's Frodo. Yeah.
I got to take my cat to the, that's amazing. I love that for you. COVID killed Frodo and here's why.
And your
dog is next.
And your dog is next. BA 2.86 is coming for your dog.
It's coming for your dog. Here's what you can do.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
See, but that's, now you can see already, like I'd click on that.
Yeah.
Well, that's how these media entities get paid. That's how YouTube people make ad revenue. And recently, like I've gone off the rails. Like you're the first interview I've done in how many weeks and all the interviews I've done prior to that have been on spirituality stuff. And so it's kind of like at some point you just click and go, all right, it's time that we wrap all of this up. Don't ever make this mistake again. Put it out there and go to the next thing that's going to get 0 views.
Yeah.
And that's what I decided to do. I have people in the comments writing things like, for a channel with so many subscribers, you get hardly any views. I'm like, that's because I'm talking about the fact that you don't exist as a separate self. Like, you don't want to hear that. No. You don't want to click that.
But you all can dissolve and surrender into it.
Exactly. Yeah. Maybe in another life. But you know what? You're not going to click on it in this life.
Okay, let's clickbait this one. Let's figure it out. Yeah,
I like that. Frodo. Yeah. Oh my God, COVID will kill your dog and other fear-based trash with Monica. Yeah. That's it. That's the answer.
That's the
I love that this is part of the interview.
He was so cute though.
He was. Yeah, he was so cute.
Physical form.
Yeah. And so how are you getting out into the world and?
Yes. I mean, it's nice to see that San Francisco is, out. Like one time I went to a concert, Tears for Fears, and someone came up to me and said, "We have vaccines, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Okay, rock on," or something. So yeah, I am seeing kind of that coming back to life of the city.
This is you I'm asking about.
Oh, well, in that way, you mean? No, I don't know. No, not yet. No.
Right.
Okay, well, you'll help me in that way.
Yeah. We'll go out on the town together.
Okay.
I love it. Except I hate doing that kind of shit. Yeah. I'm such a homebody. I realize, like I socialize so rarely.
Well, but
because I have family.
Yes, but we need to, again, the children need to see each other because we have a plan.
All right, I got you. Yeah. Well, that is a beautiful way to kind of bring full circle 3 years of you and I hanging out in this way. Isn't that something?
Thank you for these conversations.
Well, thank you.
They have been so great.
I hear from people all the time. Thank you for Monica Gandhi.
Well, thank you though for Zubin Damania because I really appreciate these conversations. You've done a very big karmic good thing for your viewers, which is to try to bring down some of that unreasonable aspects of the COVID response. It was really important.
And now I'm trying to tell them they don't exist.
Yeah, okay. That's you. Yeah, you may be going too far there for right now. But I swear next life is going to work out.
Oh, next life. Yeah. Next life. I'm hoping to avoid it by just waking up so thoroughly, but that's wishful dreaming at this point.
Let's see if we get enlightened here. Yeah.
It's all good. It's all good. Life is fun, man. It's all exactly as it is. And on that note, so I will pitch this book here because people need to buy it. Even if you don't want to read it now, put it on your shelf because when the next fear-demic happens, and which has real component of actual something you should worry about. So what do you do about it? Here's the playbook, the post-pandemic playbook.
Yeah.
Save Frodo from COVID.
Yes, exactly. It's step by step.
Yes, it's beautiful. And I'm so glad that you were able to do this. I know you were talking about it. And I'm sad that I haven't had a chance to read it yet because you showed up with the copy and I'm like reading nothing these days. Like I can't even read about anything spiritual anymore because it all feels like concept. And you're like, it's just this. There's nothing spiritual about it. It's just this.
But this is your way of putting it away. I think if people decide to read this, it puts it away and then you can move on.
Oh my God. Get rid of COVID forever by reading this book. That's the clickbait. No, that's actually, there is something to the closure because people are traumatized.
Yeah. A closure is really important because some of the media is trying to make it not close, but we have the tools. The hospitalizations are extremely low. We'll always have respiratory viruses, and we must live with this.
And this is why I think the last time you and I spoke about forgiveness too. And a lot of people in the comments were so angry they couldn't forgive. They were either angry that that the people who locked down and did masks and all that, or they were angry at the Trump people who thought it was a hoax and were costing lives by spreading vaccine disinformation.
Yeah.
And the truth is, listen, we're all doing the best we can. We're all unfolding according to the script laid out for us. We can do better by knowing more, by being present. And here we are doing that.
And then take away that anger by just reading, if reading this and then reading looking at the references if you want. But we have to give up the anger. Yeah. The polarization, there's so much polarization in this country. It'd be good to stop being polarized about COVID.
Yeah, about COVID at least.
Yeah. At least. One thing. That's our one goal for today's
The other
podcast.
thing, we can all agree that Frodo was the best dog.
He's so cute. But smelly eyes.
Smelly eyes.
Yeah.
That was like a Kim Carnes song. He's got smelly eyes. Little Frodo.
No one knew that unless you took a big sniff. And he had smelly eyes.
I got close to that dog, and I remember there was a stank, but I didn't know it was coming from his eyes.
It's just a particular feature that got carried over to the next life.
He just sat on your lap the whole
I
interview.
know. He was adorable.
Just adorable.
Yeah.
My friend Angela's dog meditates with him. Knows when he's sitting, sits on his lap for the whole meditation. During retreats and everything that he's throwing, the dog will just sit there.
Wow.
Yeah. Cleopatra.
He's his spirit animal.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's very impressive. Frodo is not, Frodo has some more lives to go. He's not a meditative dog, even in his cat form right now.
He's like Richard Nixon reincarnated.
Yeah.
He's like, gets a chance. He gets a chance to be a little nicer.
He's just a smelly-eyed cat now.
Yeah. Oh, adorable. All right. Well, boy, I'm almost speechless.
This was really great. It felt like, the 3.5 years, and then we came back together. So thank you for the opportunity.
And thank you for checking down. And the next time we talk, it's going to be about something completely different.
Yes.
Yes.
We're going to go there.
Yeah.
Yes.
And hopefully there's not another pandemic in the next few years.
Let's do 100 years for the next one.
Okay, 100 years.
Yeah.
We'll be
1918, then 2020, then...
Perfect.
Yeah,
are you going to be frozen?
No.
Like these billionaires?
No. I don't want to be frozen.
Okay, let it go. I don't want to stop talking to you. That's the problem. This should have ended like a few minutes ago, but I just want to ask you this. What do you think about these billionaires and stuff who want to live forever, who are all into this anti-aging stuff, who are doing full body scans, who are for freezing their parts in case they can be resuscitated? What's your spiritual take on that?
I will just say that we move. There was a line once, I think it was Edmund Wilson, that said we move between two darknesses, which is birth and death. And death is as much a part of life as birth. And it is not something to prolong because, of course, medicine has prolonged it, but not beyond what's reasonable because immortality sounds pretty awful. I mean, all the people that you know will die. Any fictional book, Simone de Beauvoir wrote a book about this, and all the people you love will die, and you'll be alone, and you keep on doing the same thing again and again, and it just sounds awful to me.
And the whole time you're living with a case of mistaken identity, that you are a separate shard from all the other separate shards fighting to stay alive in an environment that wants to kill you. When in reality, it might be that birth and death are truly an illusion in the fundamental sense.
I think so, too.
That's a whole nother podcast.
We'll do that next time.
All right, guys. On that note, the lovely Monica Gandhi, thank you again for coming to the show.
Thank you so much.
And we are out only.
Okay, very only. Bye.